Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this event on the closing day of our Clark exhibition, Hue Cry, French Printmaking and the Debate Over Colors. I'm Anne Leonard, Manton Curator of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs at the Clark. And here in Williamstown, it's a beautiful sunny day, giving us some whispers of spring. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker today. Before I do that, I just want to remind you that for all of our Zoom events at the Clark, we are happy to take questions after the lecture, and you are invited to put those questions into the Q&A box at any point during the lecture, and then we will get to as many of those as we can at the end. And our speaker today, I'm very pleased to introduce Mary Weaver Chapin, who is curator of prints and drawings at the Portland Art Museum in Portland, Oregon, where she has been on staff since 2012. She is currently serving as the president of the Print Council of America and has a long and impressive resume of exhibitions and publications relating to 19th century French printmaking. Her doctoral dissertation from the Institute of Fine Arts, New York University, focused on the prints and posters of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. She was then part of the research team at the Art Institute of Chicago for Van Gogh and Gauguin, the Studio of the South, in partnership with the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. Mary's next project at the Art Institute was as co-curator of the award-winning exhibition Toulouse-Lautrec and Montmartre, in conjunction with the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C. From 2005 to 2012, Mary was the curator of prints and drawings at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where she organized the exhibition, among many others, Posters of Paris, Toulouse-Lautrec, and his contemporaries. And her most recent project is one that closely touches on her talk today. Together with colleagues at the Cleveland Museum of Art, Mary curated Private Lives, Home and Family in the Art of the Nabis, 1889 to 1900, whose exhibition catalog was named one of the best art books of 2021 by the New York Times. And I have a copy of it behind me, although it doesn't have the gorgeous cover that I think Mary will show you in the lecture. So we are honored and delighted to have Mary speaking with us this afternoon on the closing day, as I said, of Hue Cry. If you're in Williamstown, I hope you'll sneak into the museum to catch your last look at it. But meanwhile, please welcome to our virtual podium, Mary Weaver Chapin.
And thank you. I'm just looking for my video. There we go. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be with you here today from Portland, Oregon. I'm sorry I'm not with you in Williamstown, Massachusetts. I love the Clark and your very talented curatorial staff. So even though I'm not with you to see the exhibition today, I did have the pleasure of spending quite a lot of time with one of the Clark's treasures, and that is Pierre Bonnard's Women with a Dog that you see here on the screen. It was part of the exhibition and just referenced on the Nabis artists, the paintings and prints. And we thought the Clark picture was so very important that I hope you are proud to see that it was the cover of our exhibition catalog. So although I'm not with you in person, the Clark has long been on my mind. And when Anne called and gave me this very kind invitation to speak with you today in conjunction with her exhibition, I had no hesitation. I was delighted to see the checklist, which Anne shared with me, and the fact that the Clark has these amazing, complete color portfolios by Bonnard, Denis, and Vuillard, published by Ambroise Vollard in 1899. So the opportunity to see all three of these suites in their entirety in one exhibition is such a treat. And that will be the focus of my talk today, as it, I hope, will shed a little bit of light on Anne's wonderful work in Hue Cry, French printmaking and the debate over colors. So my talk is all about intimate color. And to set the stage, it's important, I think, to start with what was the dominant scene in Paris at the time when these artists were working, and where were color lithographs largely seen? And the answer is that They were in the posters that lined the streets, thousands and thousands of advertising posters. Beginning in the 1870s and accelerating over the next 2 decades, brightly hued posters lined the walls, kiosks, billboards, and even the public urinals of the city. In this painting, Maximilien Loos includes huge mural-sized posters as part of the landscape of Paris. While in this photograph by Eugène Atget demonstrates both the scale and the ubiquity of posters along a street on the left bank. Posters were also found on specially designed urban furniture known as Morris columns, and they were created for the sole purpose of displaying theater programs. Those of you who get to Paris will recognize these and know that they are still an active part of the city today. So this is all to say that in the late 19th century, Paris was awash in color lithographic posters. By 1902, an estimated 1.5 million posters appeared annually in Paris alone. The undisputed father of the modern poster was Jules Chéret, whose innovations in color lithography paved the way for this great colorful spectacle. Bright colors and fanciful Rococo designs characterize Chéret's creations. They nearly always featured a young, lightly clad woman who demonstrates the ecstasy and delight to be found, for example, on this screen, at the El Dorado Music Hall and in Van Mariani, a highly intoxicating beverage that blended wine with cocaine. Chéret's feminine creation became so ubiquitous that she was known as the Chéret and was the object of fascination and desire. Blonde, nearly naked, and with her lips parted and an expression of joy on her face, the Chéret was a powerful and very public selling tool. Now, Chéret led the way for a younger generation of artists to take up the mantle of color lithographic posters. Foremost among them was Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. While Chéret focused on the alluring charrette to sell his advertised wares, Lautrec really focused on the aspects of personality and celebrity to capture our attention. He was a brilliant marketer and able to capture the essence of performers in bold, daring publicity images. Here you see Lautrec's striking poster for the can-can dancer, La Goulou, on the left, and I've paired that with his iconic image of the singer-songwriter Aristide Bruant on the right. Notice how Lautrec uses color and what his message is. He utilizes flat, bold areas of broad color, and the color communicates excitement and perhaps even a sense of menace, as the goal was to lure bourgeois Paris to these slightly seedy nightclubs that lined the foot of the avenue at the base of the hill of Montmartre, in the neighborhood where this entertainment took place. Now, these are both really big posters. The one on the left is over 6 feet tall, to give you an idea of the impact they would have had on the passers-by in the Parisian streets. But even when Lautrec made smaller posters intended for private collectors who would keep them in portfolios in their homes, he still relied on these bold colors to create excitement and intrigue. Now, these two prints, the Clark is marvelously blessed to have them both, and they feature in Anne's show. They're only about 20 inches high, so they're not poster size. They were never intended as posters, but they were intended for this burgeoning class of private print collectors. But even though they're meant for private viewing, they offer images of a very public scene. That is the extracurricular activities that took place at the Moulin Rouge dance hall. So it was known as a dance hall, but it was also known as sort of a contemporary commentator called it a flesh market. So lots of prostitution, lots of sort of deal making and things going on. And you see that especially in the work on the left entitled The Englishman at the Moulin Rouge, where this top-handed gentleman is leaning forward. He's a shadowy figure. He's leaning forward to proposition to prostitutes in their wonderful, bright, colorful dresses. So for Lautrec, the emphasis is on celebrity, as you see with his images of La Galou, on titillation, and on spectacle. So this is all to say that this is the milieu into which the artists we're going to discuss today, Bonnard, Denis, and Vuillard, found themselves in the 1890s. They were surrounded by bright, gaudy posters, and they were influenced by the really daring color lithographs of their good friend, Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. Yet, turning away from Lautrec's example, they focused not on nighttime spectacles, but on private, intimate moments of Parisian life. While Chéret and Toulouse-Lautrec could be said to represent spectacular color that was intended to telegraph an advertising message in an instant, the artists we shall discuss today put color to a different use, to create an intimate, dreamlike world. Now, before we begin to look at their prints, I'd like to introduce you to the artists themselves. And as an art historian, I will tell you, it never works out this conveniently to have a self-portrait by all three artists, by all three on the same year at the crucial moment when they came together. So I'm delighted that the artists obliged us in this way by creating images from 1889. Now, that year is significant because it was the founding of the group they called the Nabis, N-A-B-I-S would be plural, Nabis. And this was a group that wanted to create a new subjective art, not one necessarily depicting the outside world, but one that suggests through line and especially through color, mood, memory, and atmosphere. To borrow the words of their friend and mentor, the symbolist poet Stéphane Mallarmé, they wished to describe not the thing, but the emotion it aroused. And to that end, they created this brotherhood and called themselves the Nabis. Now, the prints are the focus of my talk, but I thought these paintings would be a useful introduction and teach us a little bit about their personality and their aims. We'll start with Edouard Vuillard, who is seen in this image with his friend Warwicky. He's just 20 years old or in his early 20s and starting out as an artist. He appears diffident and allows his work to speak for itself. In fact, it is only after studying the canvas that one appreciates his talent and the visual wit. He has painted this image from a mirror, which accounts for the filmy, dreamlike quality of the picture. The use of the mirror can only be decoded from the subtle reflection in the bottle at the base of the canvas, at the lower right. This tiny clue hints at Vuillard's tendency to offer oblique, even confounding views of interiors that must be puzzled out, characteristics that recur again and again in his prints. Our next protagonist, Maurice Denis, was just 18 years old when he painted this accomplished self-portrait. A natural and prolific writer, Denis started keeping a journal at age 14, and he went on to publish many books and articles from his late teens until his death at age 73. He was deeply religious and was drawn to the poetic aspects of scripture, music, and painting. Pierre Bonnard left his memories of Denis and described him as, quote, having a round face, rather smiling, on which one could read will and thoughtfulness. His blue eyes were looking inward. This inward quality will be readily apparent in the prints we examine together. Note, too, this cool pastel palette he selected for his portrait. Cool, light blues suffuse the atmosphere and highlight his pale complexion and arresting blue eyes. This palette and the matte surface of the painting evoke the subtle colors of the religious Italian frescoes the artist so loved. Finally, we meet Pierre Bonnard. He gazes directly at us, his brown eyes wide and rimmed with glasses. He holds a palette and brushes in his right hand and stands before a wall of pictures. He is quite deliberately posing as an artist and is staking his claim in this profession. This is significant because his father had insisted that he pursue a career in law. In fact, after passing his baccalaureate at age 18, he entered into law studies. His heart wasn't in it, however, so he also simultaneously pursued classes at the École des Beaux-Arts and at the Académie Julienne, where he met the artists who would become his most important influences and members of the Nabis. This self-portrait is poised right on the cusp of those two worlds. It was completed in the same year in which he was sworn into the legal profession and the same year in which the Nabis Brotherhood was founded. But as you can see, he is claiming a role as an artist, not a lawyer. And that, I think, is perhaps why he looks somewhat frightened in this self-portrait. Now, I have two more introductions to make that are crucial to understand the production of Vuillard, Denis, and Bonnard's color lithographs. The first is Ambroise Vollard, seen here with his adorable little tabby cat on his lap, in a portrait by Bonnard. Vollard is seated in his home, surrounded by his vast troves of art. He was one of the most influential art dealers of the 1890s and well into the 20th century. Around 1893, Vollard put his prodigious energies and talents into the burgeoning field of color lithography. He began by publishing albums composed of prints by various artists. By about, we're not really sure, but we think about 1896, Vollard decided to commission monographic albums, and he approached Bonnard, Denis, and Vuillard to create portfolios of prints featuring their own work. Although it is unclear when precisely each was commissioned, all three artist suites were published in 1899 in editions of 100 and were proudly exhibited at Vollard's gallery. Now, to produce these prints, all three artists worked closely with, okay, so here are the three covers for the albums we are going to discuss. And to produce those, they relied on the talents of this gentleman, Auguste Clos. And printers have traditionally been overlooked in art historical scholarship, but it's very exciting because right now there are two scholars who are working on Clos' tremendous contributions to the artistic production as well as execution in the 1890s. And I want to call them out because I'm so excited by what they're doing. One is Fleur Rose Rosa di Carvalho at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And another is Natalia Loracella of Stanford University. I think Natalia might be zooming in with us today. And I'm grateful for both for being such generous colleagues and sharing their thoughts with me on these exciting portfolios. Now, as Dr. Loracella has written, the Nabis relied on Clos not only to do the physical printing of their work, but they also welcomed his insight on matters ranging from color to composition. The process of lithography is highly complex, involving the use of a separate stone for each color, which must be precisely registered or aligned to make the composition come together. Clos' understanding of how lithographic inks layer, interact, and sit on the surface was therefore crucial to the artists. Clos was an active participant in the Nabis' conversations about color. That is, he helped them find the exact hues and shades to tell their stories. We are fortunate that some working proofs survive to help explain the process. I'm not going to go through the whole discussion of how lithographs are made. If you're interested, if you don't already know, I highly recommend a series of videos on YouTube produced by the Museum of Modern Art. But this slide here is just meant to give you an idea of the complexity. So as I was saying, each color is printed separately and they are layered on top of each other as the print goes through the press each time. This is the image, The Pastry Shop by Edouard Vuillard. It calls for 7 colors. And the Baltimore Museum of Art has preserved 5 of the 7 separations here. And the point is really just to show you that even when a color makes only a slight appearance, it requires a great deal of effort. So, for instance, in this example, blue appears in just a few places in this composition. It's in the plaid dress of the woman seated with her back to us. There's a bit in the awning above her, and a touch in the background, indicating perhaps posters on a street wall. This is further proof that no color is extraneous or accidental. When viewing these prints today, we must consider the deliberation and labor that went into each and every daub of color. So now that we've met our dramatis personae, the 3 artists, their publisher, and the printer, let's dive into the prints themselves. We'll start with Edouard Vuillard. For Vuillard, color was an active participant in the story, shaping the mood and atmosphere in each of the 12 lithographs and the cover of his suite, Interiors and Landscapes and Interiors. Pinks pile on pinks, greens spar with lavender, and no effort is too great to achieve exactly the right effect. Each color is carefully blended. It is created from scratch rather than straight out of the tube. Claude Roger Marx, one of the artist's first biographers and a sensitive viewer of Vuillard's work, noted the artist's predilection for secondary and tertiary colors, each with a poetic resonance. He describes Vollard's colors as, quote, extinct, broken, or even dead. And they include old brick and tanned leather pinks, steel, slate, or asphalt blues, greenish or ashen whites, eggplant violets, seaweed greens, lichen grays. These are opposed to the freshness of tonic accents vigorously placed here and there, reds, yellows, pinks, or bright violets, maroons, and blacks. After rhapsodizing over Vuillard's color selections for another paragraph or 2, Roger Marx sums up that color plays the role of a confidant or an intimate friend in Vuillard's work, marvelously transposed by the artist's vision, but always respectful of memory and life. The 3 lithographs on your screen now show you Vuillard's range and the impact that color has on our perception of each scene. In this section of my talk, I'll focus on these 3 images to seek out to tell the story of how he told his story and conveyed his vision, or as Roger Marx would have it, how color acts as an intimate confidant, suggesting the secrets of these enigmatic images. Let's start with Vuillard's composition of 3 figures crossing the Pont de Europe, a bridge close to the Saint-Lazare train station. Thanks to surviving drawings and proof states, we can reconstruct his ceaseless search for exactly the right hues. As we will see, Vuillard has already determined in this first rough sketch done in pastel the composition and color scheme, selecting a gray background and limiting the colors of the clothing to a palette of black, yellow, and rose. Compare it to this watercolor sketch, now housed in the Van Gogh Museum. Vuillard adjusts his tones ever so slightly, making the yellow a hint less buttery, the pink more dominant, and the gray background warmer. In these 2 proofs, now housed in the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Vuillard fusses with the gray and yellow tones, now making them warmer, then cooler, brighter, then faded. His restless searching continued into additional proofs. In this slide, we see how Vuillard has replaced the black for the small girl's shawl, trying it on first as mauve, then in a rich teal. Her apron, too, starts out as a cornflower blue before becoming teal, and Vuillard even adds some of the teal to the plaid dress and umbrella of the taller girl, giving the image a richer, more autumnal feeling. Ultimately, however, he finally decided on this color scheme, and this is the image you see in Anne's show right now. But even though this appears in the final edition set of the color lithographs, he must have had a terrible time deciding on the official color, as several impressions from the suite have color variants. So here I show you the collection in the Portland Art Museum. Both the Clark's and the Portland's impression are from edition suites, and yet you will see that the color schemes are slightly different. To return to the where we started, this first pastel image of the composition and the final Clark lithograph, we are reminded of the words of Roger Marx, who noted that Vuillard often started with strong contrasts and high tones, but worked again and again to refine the color. Roger Marx notes that, quote, "It is almost always by renouncing an easy effect with slight corrections, by muting secondary tones and eliminating many details, that Vuillard reaches the summit of simplicity and delight." Now, Vuillard's attention to color was not merely a matter of indecision, but it was all in the service of creating a specific mood or vision. This, I believe, is especially evident in his interior views. In these three sheets, entitled Interior with Pink Wallpaper 1, 2, and 3, you will notice that they are independent sheets, but they form a cohesive vision. As the title reveals, the subject of the prints is the wallpaper itself. Like an invasive weed, it runs rampant across the surface of the sheets, creating a vibrant tapestry. The repeating red floral pattern on top of a pink background produces a close, impenetrable interior. The warm glow of the chandelier, daringly placed in the foreground and across two separate sheets, intensifies this ambiance of seclusion. Small touches of blue lighten the atmosphere in places, and hinting at a glimpse of the city beyond the windows. But the pinks, reds, and yellows keep it tightly in check, preventing any air or freedom from entering the composition. The overall effect is one of privacy and intimacy, veering on claustrophobia. Vollard exploited closely related hues to intensify the interiors in other sheets as well. Here we see the composition Game of Checkers, created using just 4 colors. Note how the plum red dress of the woman is endowed with a checkerboard pattern of another red, close in hue, but distinct enough to form a new pattern. The same plum color recurs in the wallpaper behind her, in the jackets of the gentlemen, and in the floral upholstery, knitting the figures together and firmly ensconcing them in their environment in a comfortable embrace. Vuillard used color to suggest unease as well as comfort. Acid greens dominate the scene here, jostling with the orangey red pattern on the tablecloth and the chair in the background. The lavender mullions of the windows in the back add another discordant note. Slowly, the viewer discerns a shadowy figure to the right of the composition. It is Vuillard's mother, silently watching over the scene. Her spectral appearance, drawn in the same strokes of dark and light green as the shadows, is ominous, even uncanny, as if she were woven from moss or encased in amber. Vuillard's interiors depict both a physical space as well as an emotional space, one crafted largely by color and capable of evoking ineffable things. The critic Roger Marx said that Vuillard's color could evoke the perfume of childhood or of winter. He goes further, praising the enchantment of the prints and likening his use of color to a poem by Mallarmé or a quartet by Ravel. He concludes, "And are these prints not also chamber music? All the searching, knowledge, sacrifices, and corrections are fused in the grace of a success that one would say was obtained without effort." This seemingly effortless appearance of perfect color harmony and musicality continues in the work of Maurice Denis as well. Denis's suite is entitled Amour, or Love, and it is an ode to his wife, Marthe. This suite, I might add, is the subject of a current exhibition at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. There, curator Fleur Rosa de Carvalho has brought together the preliminary drawings, notes, and working proofs that chronicle the evolution of the series. I encourage you to check it out online, and I very much am hoping to get to Amsterdam to further my understanding of this remarkable work. The Portland Art Museum recently had our own set of Love on view in the exhibition I referenced earlier, Private Lives, Home and Family in the Art of the Nabis, and seen in this installation slide here. Time and time again, as I was giving gallery tours, people asked me if the colors of some of the prints had faded. When I answered no, first of all, they usually didn't believe me, but if I did manage to convince them, their next question was invariably, well, why would Denis include such boldly saturated prints as well as very pale works in the same suite? And you can see in my installation, I had some very dark, rich prints next to some pale, almost lunar impressions. So happily, I'm going to try to answer that question for you now about why did he include these different types of colors. And again, we are reliant on working documents and color trial proofs that help tell this story. This extraordinary image, now in the Van Gogh Museum, is a proof impression for the print that would become Life Becomes Precious and Discreet. Graphite notations surround the image where Denis urges the printer, Auguste Clos, to alter the hues and tones. His instructions, however, lack specificity. In one note, he asks Clos to make, quote, "make the yellow more green," while in another he states, "lower the pink on the head," and elsewhere he requests that Clos, quote, "replace the pink and undo the greens everywhere except on the blue and on the woman." Now, as my friend and colleague, Natalia Laurentella, has pointed out, and I thank Natalia for allowing me to use her excellent translations, Natalia points out these instructions leave a great deal to the imagination, allowing Clos to determine how much paler the pink should become and to what extent he should nudge the yellow towards green. Clearly, Denis valued Clos' input. Moreover, Denis and Clos had the patience and determination to work again and again to achieve the desired visual and emotional outcome. Now, if we compare the proof impression on the left with the final editioned version, you will immediately note the paler, more evanescent effect. Again, we are reminded of Vuillard's working process in which stronger contrasts are muted again and again to produce a harmonious whole. When you see this lithograph in person, you begin to appreciate how the pastel shades, so closely related and so beautifully blended, suggest memory, longing, and desire. For Denis, color set the mood and tone, provoking emotion in the viewer beyond a visual response. It was, in many ways, like music itself for the artist, since color could speak a language beyond mere shape and form, sometimes forte, sometimes pianissimo. In tandem with his color harmonies, Denis relied on the elliptical poetic titles used to evoke emotion in the viewer. Many of the titles were drawn directly from his journal, which chronicled his courtship of Marthe. Several of the fragmentary titles come from this entry I show you here on the screen. He writes in September 30th, 1891, "Evening, being in love makes one feel more beautiful. Attitudes are easy and chaste. Life becomes precious, discreet. Twilights have the softness of old paintings, but it is a heart that beats too fast, truth to tell. One is good and merciful." Now, these fragmentary thoughts hint at a narrative without fully coalescing into a traditional story, nor does the artist tell us the order of the sheets and therefore the precise unfolding of the suggested narrative. Only one of the sheets in the entire series has a number on it, and this is the final sheet, which you see on the right of your screen, but it is the heart that beats too fast. And you will notice there's a tiny little Roman numeral 12 at the bottom of the sheet. Now, it is safe to bet that number 12 was intended as the final, and we can assume that the cover is considered the first image. But how then are we to arrange the remaining 11 sheets? Now, there are a couple competing theories in the art historical landscape. One camp believes that the sheets should be ordered according to their titles as they appeared in Denis' journal, while another order follows the arrangement of Denis' first cataloger. And yet another group of scholars believes that the lithographs can be arranged at will and that the narrative changes based on their arrangement. And that has been really convincingly put forward by scholar Rachel Sloan. I find Dr. Sloan's argument most compelling and would encourage you to think about them in any way that you like. But for the purpose of today's lecture, I'd like to offer an experimental reading. And this is the first time I'm thinking this through. It's kind of like cooking a new recipe when company's coming. I probably shouldn't pull out a new theory on a public talk, but let's try it anyway. And today I'd like to suggest that perhaps the color tells the story and tells us the order of the prints. Now, in this hypothetical arrangement, I would put these two images first, where color moves from the intensity of infatuation to the final images that will have a more lunar and lyrical color arrangement of a transcendent love. The first images in my proposed format are both interiors, and both feature Marthe and her sister Eva. Now, this might be significant, as the curator at the Musée, Maurice Denis, told me that Denis was in love with both sisters, but could only marry one. So is this a reference, perhaps, at the very beginning of his courtship to his split devotions? On the left, we see the women united under a frilly yellow lamp, and on the right, they are poised in another interior. Oh, I should point out on the left, they're at the piano. Notice that they're at the piano. And perhaps these are a reference to Denis' early painted portraits of the sisters. Both women were pianists, and in fact, he met the women through their piano teacher, who was a mutual friend. The lithographs, made years later, featured the same dense, lush coloration, and like the paintings, they are focused on intimate interior scenes. We move now from the interior to an enclosed garden. In addition to being a private, intimate space, the enclosed garden, or the hortus conclusus, is also a Christian metaphor for the purity of the Virgin Mary, a reference that the very devout Catholic Denis is surely referencing. Here he poses Marthe with roses and peonies, drawing upon the language of flowers to further his story of love and courtship. The colors begin to lighten and soften as we progress and enter deeper into the realm of allegory and suggestion. The image of Marthe reposing on the right reinforces the idea of a vision or a dream, as do the muted colors. The subsequent sheets merge ever more towards an almost monochromatic presentation. Not only are the colors pastel in tone, but the application of the lithographic ink also mimics the delicate, hazy effect of a drawing made from pastels. The edges are blurred and forms such as the trees in the image on the right, are only vaguely suggested. In this, the penultimate pairing, Denis directly evokes religious imagery in his titles. On the left, the knight did not die on the crusade, and on the right, it was a religious mystery. We are entering now into an ever more nebulous, mystical world in which the sacred blends into daily life. In this, the final pairing in my hypothetical offering for you today, Denis used the sparest, most evanescent color to convey his mystical love for Marthe. On the right, a male figure, perhaps the artist himself, kneels before Marthe, maybe in a marriage proposal. The final image, marked with a Roman numeral 12, is on the right. Marthe appears to be in an ecstatic swoon, a trope again borrowed from religious art. Now, this is a hypothetical reading, and I encourage you to mentally arrange the sheets in any order that suits you. However, by following Denis' color clues, he effectively moves us from the concrete reality of courting Marthe by the piano to an ever more dreamlike, mystical, and ultimately transformed love in the final image. We will conclude with Pierre Bonnard's Meditation on the City, some aspects of Parisian life. Unlike Vuillard, who focused on small, dark rooms and dark apartments, or Denis, who turned his attention to enclosed gardens and private interiors, Bonnard took Paris as his theme. But even though the metropolis was his subject, it was the private corners and hushed moments of Paris that drew his attention far more than the raucous nightclubs we witnessed at the beginning of this lecture in prints and posters by Toulouse-Lautrec and Chéret. Instead, Bonnard used composition and color to present an intimate view of the city. It is, in effect, Paris as lived by the Parisians. Now, for those of you familiar with Bonnard's full career, you will know that he was a daring and luscious colorist, as witnessed in countless paintings and prints. Thus, it is ironic that the lithographs of some aspects of Parisian life are nearly monochromatic, as you see in this cover, and most were printed in just 4 closely related colors. Now, this is doubly ironic, given that the 1890s, this decade, was known as the color revolution in printmaking. Perhaps Bonnard's avoidance of saturated color is evidence of his wry sense of humor, as he playfully thumbed his nose at his friend Vuillard's rich colors and Denis' symphony of pastels. Or perhaps Bonnard sought the greatest possible distance, excuse me, from the gaudy color posters lining the streets of Paris. Or perhaps he simply set himself a challenge to eke out the most feeling with the fewest colors. Regardless of his motive, his end goal remained the same: to suggest mood, memory, and emotion through the careful manipulation of color. This lovely watercolor painting from the Harvard Art Museums is a good place to start. Probably completed around 1897, Bonnard used ink, watercolor, and graphite to evoke Parisians bustling about on a dark evening. The inky black figures become silhouettes as they move across the boulevard. Intervals of yellow watercolor represent light reflecting off wet cobblestones in the foreground and suggest light of the, suggests the warmth of light in the background that perhaps represents storefronts. At the top center and slightly to the left, a small passage of red watercolor draws the eye further into the background. Now, this watercolor surely informed the mood, atmosphere, and composition of these 2 sheets published in some aspects of Parisian life. In both lithographs on the screen before you, Bonnard limits his color to just a handful of shades: yellow, putty gray, olive green, and black. As in the watercolor, silhouetted forms proceed across the sheets like puppets in a shadow theater. Here, Bonnard has more fully articulated the shops in the background, beckoning the viewer with a promise of light and warmth. A closer look at Square in the evening reveals Bonnard's restraint, as well as his playful deployment of highlights. The red flowers on the hat of the woman in the foreground helps anchor the composition. To the upper right, the second-story windows in the shop fronts shift from yellow to red, creating a sense of recession in a composition that is otherwise entirely plainer. To the left, small scribbled details of red animate the background without describing form. Can you see that? They're just little, almost scribbly touches. Most curious of all is Bonnard's seemingly haphazard use of red on the face of the figure at the bottom left. To be honest, I have been looking at this lithograph for years, and it was only as I began to prepare this talk that I noticed it. Once noticed, however, it refuses to blend back into the background. As we discussed earlier in this talk, each additional color is another step of work for the artist and printer, so there is nothing accidental about Bonnard's placement. What then is the point of the seemingly extraneous and non-naturalistic daub of red on the pedestrian's face, or the scribbled red lines in the background? Alas, there are no surviving letters or trial proofs to solve this mystery, but knowing the artist, I am convinced that Bonnard and printer Auguste Clos considered the matter carefully, and this composition would have been much poorer without it. A similar game of color plays out in preparations for houses in the courtyard. Bonnard began the composition sometime around mid-decade, exploring the geometry of the courtyard outside his window in this pastel. He established the rhythmic march of horizontal and vertical lines that define the window he gazes from, as well as those of the windows, shutters, and roof lines beyond. You will not be surprised to learn that, like Vuillard and Denis, Bonnard was attuned to the finest nuances of color. On the left, we see a trial proof to which Bonnard has added hand coloring. Traces of blue streak down the window frame on the left and appear again in the foreground. On the right, yet another proof with additions, this time added with color pencil. You will see that the tone of the windowsill, sash, and roofs change from a cool gray on the left to a warm olive beige on the right. The subtle shift of color alters our perceptions of the weather, light, and mood. The image on the left suggests the cold, hard gray skies of a Parisian winter, the cold resounding off the cobblestones and courtyard walls. The sheet on the right, however, summons the shoulder season of spring or fall when the light has a traditional contingent quality. I show you here 3 progressions of these colors and ask you to note how each one creates, even though it's the exact same composition, how each one creates a slightly different mood, suggests perhaps a different time of day, and also, I think, a different season. Instead of going for an easy effect, Bonnard eschewed a very facile presentation, instead knitting his colors together in a harmonious whole. We will end with this, perhaps his quietest yet most sophisticated print of the series. Bonnard shows the utmost restraint, working in just light bistre, beige, deep brown, and pale yellow. In the background, a frieze of carriages and an omnibus make their way across the bridge that connected the Louvre on the right bank to the Institut de France on the left bank. The pale procession of carriages appears as if through a fog, or perhaps in the dull, padded light of a recent snow. The hazy color evokes the atmospheric conditions, but it also hints that we are viewing a memory or a vision rather than a precisely observed and objective moment of time. This isn't simply the bridge, but the artist's own feeling and emotion towards the scene. This is true in the foreground images. drawn with economy and formed with just 2 colors. In this detail, we see a mother and a child at left, and to the right, an artist with a massive portfolio under his arm, perhaps hurrying on his way to the Louvre. Zooming on these figures yet again, we are struck by Bonnard's skill in suggesting atmosphere with just a few strokes of his lithographic crayon. His faint lines, scribbled with the quick touch of the lithographic crayon on the stone, indicate impressions in the snow, or alternatively, hints of rain puddles on the cobbled streets. We are reminded again in this extreme close-up view of the eloquence of Bonnard's color, coupled with his free draftsmanship. We have gone from the jeweled tones of Vuillard's interiors to the lumescent hues of Denis' romantic vision, to Bonnard's hushed, nearly monochromatic city scenes. In each case, color plays a starring role in constructing intimate Paris. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the scholars whose work has influenced my thinking on these print portfolios, the 3 print portfolios, and I list them here. One of the great dilemmas giving a lecture is that you can't include footnotes, but I'd like to acknowledge the excellent work of these scholars who are considering these questions and who have generously shared their thoughts with me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary. That was just splendid. Absolutely gorgeous. I adore these works, and I have been scribbling away because you have illuminated so many more facets to them, and just really highlighted the process as well as the poetry of these remarkable works. So thank you. And I'll remind our audience that questions are welcome. Through the Q&A box, or if you're on Facebook, in the comments box on Facebook Live. But as people are typing, maybe I will start with one for you myself. And I guess you rightly emphasize this economy of means used by the artists. We know that the lithographic technology for color prints at this point would have permitted, for sort of commercial purposes, right? At trade shows, you could see demonstration cards that would have 37 colors, printed on a single impression. Clearly, that was not the direction these artists wanted to go. But I'm just curious to know what you think in terms of what was the balance between the reality of the economics. I mean, you rightly pointed out that complexity of the process and each color being very intentional and involving an extra step of work. How much of it was that sort of economic break? Was it Vollard or Clos sort of wagging a finger at the artist, or was it as well or more so an aesthetic choice simply because that was the challenge the artists wanted to pose themselves in this kind of Mallarméan idea of expressing the most with the least in that evocative way? Just interested in your thoughts on that.
Oh, that's a great question. Wouldn't you love to know what the publisher said? And perhaps, perhaps one of these scholars that I mentioned would be able to illuminate more if there are letters about that. My feeling is that there's enough range in these 3 suites. There are some Vuillard's prints that called for 7 colors, and most of Bonnard's are just 4. It's my sense, although I can't back this up, that they were given this freedom, and that they certainly had the technological ability to get where they wanted to go. And also just thinking about their paintings as well and how they used color. But the economic aspect is really considerable as well. These today are hailed as some of the finest lithographs of the 19th century, but they were not a commercial success. They were intended to be sold as a complete set, and yet the marketplace, that the appetite wasn't there. Many of them were broken up and sold by individual sheets, and a great number of them, happily for us, I think just were left in a drawer for many, many decades and slowly came out onto the market. So it's interesting to see when they started to being placed in different museums. And do you happen to know when the Clark acquired theirs? I think it was early, wasn't it? And maybe even in the 30s? I'm trying to look at
all our accession numbers are actually from 1962, and I know that they were all from a Chicago collector actually called Herbert Mickle. And but I don't know when so he was an American. I don't know when they came into his possession. I don't know the provenance before that. But it's true that the fact that these portfolios did go unsold, I mean, it's a pity for Vollard, who was trying to, earn a living, but it's very fortunate for us. It's quite true, because the fact that these works were sitting undisturbed means that they do have the beautiful condition that they still do today after all these years. Thank you. So we do have some questions coming in, so I'm going to send a couple of these your way. The first question is asking about the influence on these artists of Japanese prints.
Oh. I'm glad the viewers picked up on that. All three were highly influenced by Japanese prints. We believe they all attended this magnificent exhibition in 1890 that had thousands upon thousands of ukiyo-e prints on display. It was the same exhibition that inspired Mary Cassatt in her wonderful color aqua tints. And in fact, each of these artists in their brotherhood, the Nabis brotherhood, had these silly little nicknames. And the one for Bonnard was the very Japanese Nabis. So they didn't work in woodblock as the Japanese artists did, but they tried to translate some of those same concepts into color lithography. So like the flat colors, oblique angles, and some of the same themes of daily life that you find in ukiyo-e prints. So there are many dissertations out there about the Nabis and Japonisme. And I think your own collection, Anne, probably tells that story very well.
Oh, it does. Thank you. Yeah. And there is a vast, it is a vast topic, but the simple answer is absolutely yes, and yes. We have a question from a sharp-eyed viewer who notices that the Clark Denis series begins with a litho called Allegory. And this viewer is asking how that fits in to the series.
Well, as I said in my talk, there's no kind of prescribed rule for how they must be displayed. I should have asked Anne ahead of time how yours are installed. Oh. But you know what? Allegory would be a great way to start the series, because it really is, that is what Denis is sharing with us. He's publishing these in 1899, but he's going back to his memories of 1891 when he's first courting his wife, Marthe, and he's creating this poetic vision of their courtship and the importance of love, from some of the most mundane to the most transcendent. So Anne, is your series, did you hang it with Allegory as the first?
We hung it, I think, in order by accession number, and I think that follows the catalog.
Probably catalog reasoning.
Yeah. But actually, that does raise the question, and I don't know if it was explicit in the talk, but when the suite was originally offered in a set, did it come that we know of with a proviso, or were they loose sheets that the collector could then assemble as wished?
They were loose sheets. There was no title page or indication of the order. Mm-hmm. And so only the final sheet has a little Roman numeral 12. And I was really inspired by a scholar named Rachel Sloan, who talks about the set as almost like a symbolist poem, where there are these little phrases that you can kind of dip into and dip out of and arrange at will. And each time you rearrange them, you create a new narrative.
That's fascinating. That's great.
It gives us art historical latitude too, Anne, so we can put them up anyway.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you proposed a new order, which again focused on that color journey, is just so exciting. So let's see. I see maybe one or two more questions, and then I might have another one for you myself. Let's see. Oh, here's one asking if these artists, the three you spoke about, did they work with other artists? Did they work with Mucha? Did they do work at the same time?
Oh, wow. Those are great questions. Okay. So these three that we talked about were all intimate friends. So they were in conversation. They saw each other. They were sharing their work. They were exhibiting together. I don't know if they were ever at the print shop together. In fact, I know Natalia is on this talk. Natalia, if you know the answer to that, type it into the Q&A or the chat. But they were a different milieu than Alphonse Mucha, the great Art Nouveau poster maker, who was printing at exactly the same time. It was the same ambiance, but they were, they were just a different social crowd. They would have certainly seen his posters in the streets. I don't know to what extent Mucha was aware of their work, but that's the reason we call the 1890s the color revolution. We had glorious color posters on the streets, but we also had these fine, intimate, collectible prints for the highest connoisseurs. We had playbills, we had ticket stubs, everything. It was just a real mishmash of color exploding into the daily life.
That's right. And I'm so glad that amid that cacophony, you really helped us to focus in on these interior, more intimate uses of color. It is this other aspect that tends to be more hidden, but that you just brought so beautifully to life. I do see that we're just a moment or two past 3 o'clock. So I'm going to cut off the questions there. I've gotten a couple questions though, simply about, from a practical perspective, has this program been recorded so that people can watch it later and enjoy and go back? And yes, the answer is yes, we will have the edited version of this program on our website within the next week. And so I invite you to come back and just enjoy the delectation of these wonderful works again, and of Mary's wonderful talk. So thank you again. It's been, and here's maybe a note from Natalia. So before we close, I'll just work that in, who says, I don't believe the Nabis worked together on their projects, but they would likely have seen each other's trial proofs in process. And that she's seen, and Natalia has seen references in artist letters to Clos mentioning that they had seen a colleague's trial proof in process, which is actually all the more fascinating, right? To the idea of this cross-fertilization, even in midstream of the development of composition. So,
well, and your exhibition does that, tells you how crucial color was, controversial, and how evocative it is. It's absolutely essential to telling the story of these artists' work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, Mary, for just such an enlightening talk, beautifully presented, and thank you to all of our viewers. And we will. I have told people, with some disappointment in my own voice, that we are, because of the fragility of these color works, that we will be unable to exhibit them again altogether in this way for some years. But meanwhile, the Manton Study Center has appointments open. If you would ever like to come and see individual works on your own in Williamstown, we can make those available in that way. So thank you again, and everyone enjoy the rest of your Sunday afternoon. Thanks very much for being with us.